But yes, hi everybody. Welcome to our long-awaited August fireside chat for Asian Wonder Women. We've just been dealing with some technical difficulties, but we sorted them out now. But I am very excited to be joined by Ming Xia this month for our talk on how to take a retirement year before you actually retire. And it's exciting also because we have Mars here with us, who I've also done a previous fireside chat with, and she also took like a retirement gap year. So this isn't the first time we've talked about this topic, but it continues to be exciting for me because selfishly, I also have been living gap year life now for over 3 years. So this is like a topic very near and dear to me as well. So excited to jump into things. So enough about me. Let's hop over to our speaker of the day, and I will let you introduce yourself. Tell us where you're located, what you're up to, where you're from, just a little bit more about you.
All right, definitely. Hi everyone. Thanks Justin, thanks Mars for hosting today. And hi everyone. The Asian Wonder Woman is such a big community that always keeps me inspired. So I am actually from Singapore. I lived here all my life until I started traveling a great ton for work during COVID, and I am currently back in Singapore. So that's the resident fishes in the background. Yeah. And currently I am on retirement year month number 15. It's been a work in progress. It's supposed to be 12 out of 12, but life happens. Yeah. So I'm
I
excited to be sharing.
Yeah, I think it's it's it often happens this way. I mean, there's like things to be said about if you budget for a certain amount of time, but then also new opportunities arise and new perspectives emerge, and then suddenly your time extends. So let's talk about what inspired you to take this retirement year.
Absolutely. So there are a series of factors, and it's compounded since 2021. So based on ideation all the way to eventually going on a retirement year, it took at least 6 years. 2019 was first when my friend shared with me about Tim Ferriss and the 4-hour work week, where they kind of sounded in the idea of a micro retirement, where every few years after working you take a break, so that you can recharge, you can create time to recover from burnout if you go through that, and to just recalibrate to figure out how you can better optimize the next phase of your life. So that was one of those ideas. And eventually for myself as well, with work, I was traveling a great deal from 2021, being based in Europe, and then 2022 was mostly in Southeast Asia. And 2023, it was a chapter in India. So it's been really exciting moving from different countries and different parts of the world, to be the boots on the ground to explore local cultures the way that local businesses experience it. So it has been such fun, but it's also really intense in the entrepreneurial world because every time things move, they move thrice as fast. And you always have to be ahead, thinking 2 steps ahead at least. So eventually, I enjoyed that a lot. But in terms of experiencing the different parts of the world, I wanted to explore this a little bit more freely. So the caveat with my work is that I used to be a little bit of a digital nomad, but I'm a not so digital nomad because um, I was running as essentially I help build global communities around the world wherever we have a startup house. So that's, think of it as like being in Bali, being in Penang, and even Manila and Croatia and Hungary as well. However, one of the challenges is that a lot of the work that goes into in-person community building requires a lot of back-end hustle that not many people chat about. Because if you're meeting somebody, you do have to do a follow-up. If you're talking about connecting people, that's not just curation and saying, "Hey, I'll do this," but you also have to follow through with that. So as fun as it was, it eventually forced me to it enabled me to think beyond what the hustle looked like. So in Chinese, there's always a phrase that says like first you have the beta and then you have the 先苦后甜. So afterwards you enjoy the sweet things in life, but no one really tells you when you can, afford to enjoy the sweet things, or when you've done enough, or like you deserve like a pat on the back. So for me, I was really curious of what exactly that, that period would look like. And maybe it's a little bit of a midlife crisis or an existential crisis. Yeah. So I mean, it helped me out with trying to figure out like what's the bigger picture in life. And eventually, when you extrapolate the data, in the first 30 years of like living, how are you gonna live the next 31? And figure out what that retirement could look like. Yeah. So
Yeah, that's amazing. I think for me as well, I always think about how different life is when you're in your 30s, obviously, and when you're in your 60s, if you choose to retire then. And so if you do that, the things that you want to pursue, the things that you're interested in, the things that your mind and body are capable of doing are also very different. And so being able to take the time to do it now when we're still in our 30s is very, very exciting and different. It's just a totally different experience. So I think that's important as well. When you
um,
decided to take this, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, that actually there were maybe like one or two more things that I wanted to reinforce on. And there's a lot of in present day, especially within the entrepreneurial world, a lot of people always talk about hustle, and how they glorify building and spending countless of hours trying to refine their product and eventually hit success. Um, but in present day, no one really talks about like health, because there's this aspect of if you're always working and you don't really take the break, you would break eventually. And the second thing as well is that with life happening, it's really unpredictable. So like I always say that in Singapore, you have really good healthcare for preventive measures. Not really for preventive, actually more for mitigative measures. So we have top tier healthcare, but the challenge is more of like if you can't even take the root cause and look after yourself, in the sense where like you give yourself enough break, enough rest, then it's really unpredictable as well as to when a person could possibly like just pass out or tap out. Life makes a decision for us. That's something that's not exactly always in our hands. It depends on the deck that life deals us.
Totally. And it's also like, not to be too grim, but you truly don't know what could happen tomorrow. Like you could get hit by a car, you could something could happen. And so there is also, I think, the balance of like living every day as if it's your last. There is that balance. You can't go spend
Always.
all your money right away, but you have to find that perfect balance. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think the trigger for me was like after a COVID episode when I was stuck in France. I was on my way back from Croatia to Singapore. And I was like alone in the apartment looking at the washing machine spin because I'm just like, you know what, no matter how much washing can happen, the virus is still there. And I think like post COVID, it helped me to figure out like, okay, maybe this is really like a reset. And if you could, take that break and slow down, what would life look like? And during that time when I was recovering, I was actually in Nice, in France, where a lot of people call it like a retirement town as well. So that was an interesting perspective because you see, this is a place where people go to like retire. And as a serial people watcher, I love seeing like how observing people's way of lives, trying to figure out the same for myself as well. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to add. I think health is wealth. It's rarely emphasized. And in Singapore media, like in recent years, they only start lagging it because people in their early 30s or like late 20s are like passing away randomly because of like terminal illness, and they glorify. I mean, it's not really glorified, but they put an emphasis of, oh, this is when, you host a living funeral or an art exhibition, when certain things that should always be enjoyed is finally like, deserving of that attention. Yeah.
Wow. That's scary that that's happening. But I think you're right. Health is wealth. And I think before we like continue with the questions we prepared, it just made me think of uh, there's the argument of, you talked about hustle culture. There's the argument that you should hustle when you're younger to build for your future. And I'm curious if you have thoughts on that, because I'll share my thoughts after. I'll ask you first. How do you feel about, yeah, hustling when you're younger?
I am 110% with that because when I was younger, I definitely hustled. If I'm looking back in the last 10 to 12 years of career, I've been working since I was 16. And along with that, I think it really working in the service industry, by the way, really helped with perspective on everything that you earn per dollar. Because in the past, like in Singapore, like generally, most of the households are quite affluent, so you don't really have to work until after you're fresh out of college. That's most of the majority of like the middle class. But on the other hand, I think for me, what I enjoyed was while you're working, you're using your time to gain experience in real life. And the other thing as well was learning about the value of money. Because in the past, like if I was working in a cafe, it would have been like $8 an hour. And instead, I always thought that, oh, like every time I eat a plate of, smashed avos, it would be like 3 hours of that work from my 20-year-old self. So I really appreciate that because that sort of created the fundamentals. Eventually, to be able to learn how to consciously take this break. Yeah, because looking back, after out of college, I think I was dealing with like one full-time job, but I took on a volunteer role with an NGO because I was really trying to segment my life in the sense where I couldn't create balance for myself. And I wanted to be able to create an identity beyond the work persona that I was having, but also be able to grow skills that I couldn't get in one of the workplaces. And eventually it created a segue into future job opportunities, which I so appreciated. And there was one point in time in life where I had like maybe 3 jobs, and yeah, at a time, the hustle was a little bit too hard.
But it paid off in the end.
It did pay off. I think it was, yeah, I mean, it helped me to really try and figure out, like, just get all of these experiences first, because while you're young and you still have that energy, that's the best time that you could try and figure out, like, if you're, your own resource, how do you stretch that dollar? And also, the first time I took a break was like 7 years ago, straight out of college, and I was backpacking for about 3 months. And I saved up for about 3 years from all the jobs that I've done to take that break. But I was your idea of like a broke backpacker because I was running on a budget with like 10 weeks. So then there was a lot of different experiences with like hostels, couch surfing, and a lot of good stories to tell. They always tell you if you if you live to tell the tale, it's either a good idea or a good story. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Okay, let's jump back into the topic at hand. I think you've changed my perspective a little bit on hustle culture, but we'll continue. What was the reaction of those around you when you shared this idea that you wanted to take a year off? What was the difference between how your friends reacted versus how your family reacted?
All right. Okay. So it is a great question. I will always remember the time when I first sounded the idea of a retirement year to my boss back then. When I was working with Draper Startup House, I remember one time it was maybe 2 years before I started taking retirement year, but I had an idea in mind. And I was having a birthday lunch with my boss, and I was like, "Have you ever, thought like?" He's like, "Sia, what do you want to do with your life?" I'm like, "Boss, I think maybe in a couple of years I want to do a retirement year, and take a year off. I'm fundraising for my future self, actually, for time in exchange for money in present day. So because if you look at time as a currency, um, a lot of people would always one of the ideas that my friends sounded to me was that if whatever buys you time, you pay for that. And it helped me to get a different perspective because in my brain I was always transacting in money as the currency. But then there are so many different kinds of currencies and resources to think about, like time, and also social present day, social network as a currency as well, and whatnot. But I think in the bigger picture of life, like how I found that bridge was also recognizing that relationships are important. And there are a few films that kind of inspired me as well. So one of it was like Click, with the Adam Sandler as the main character, and he never really got to live the life with his loved ones. Eventually, like the marriage fell apart, and his kids grew old before he knew it. So for me, if I think about that, like that's the kind of regrets that I do not want to have. Like one day when I wake up at 60 and I realize I missed out on life. Yeah. So with my friends and my colleagues, like everyone was a little bit more receptive to it because actually people in the entrepreneurial world, a lot of them have worked. And then what that looks like for the life journey of like, maybe a finance professional is that they work for about 6 to 8 years. They realize that they're burnt out. They go on a sabbatical. And in Draper Startup House, where you have a lot of entrepreneurs and digital nomads and founders, they always had that mindset of, what's next, and uh, sometimes people would think that it's crazy to actually take a break because especially when you hear them sharing their stories as well, they'll say that, oh, my family thought that I was crazy because I had a very well paying job and suddenly I quit, and now I'm doing a startup idea which nobody understands because like no one is an entrepreneur within the family. So that was helpful because finding friendship and support in the community was a huge driver. It helped me to understand that the future is really here. It's just unevenly distributed. And you see that people have lived the reality that you have imagined before. And if it's not in Singapore, it's in all the different parts of the world. So that helps out. And coming to the family side, I think my sister has always been supportive. I remember when I was in India, in Hyderabad, before I left, I was based there for about 6 months. And one day I was on a call with my sister and she was like, listen, like, when was the last time you actually do something for yourself? And at that point, she was also quite burnt out with her work because she's a physiotherapist and healthcare is there's a huge market in healthcare in Singapore, but it can be quite thankless and quite draining. And so she was also planning to do a mini sabbatical and a retirement year. So in the end, we did it together. And it has been quite a journey. It's been fun. And at first, my parents were, my dad, being the conventional Asian dad, he was like, "You still can work. Why do you want to retire?" And then I remember I told him like, "Dad, I still have a pair of hands. If at any point of time I need to get back into work, I can start working again." And the irony is that later on, I remember on day two of retirement year, actually a friend texted me. He's like, "Hey, Sia, I don't know where in the world you are right now, but I have a gig. Do you want to take it on?" So the catch is that instead of working 6 or 7 days a week now, I'm working 1 day a week, and that's on every Sunday. So that's the plot twist. But at least it's a lot more enjoyable. It's based on my own pace. I do have free time to ideate, to read books, to consume content that I want to. And along the way, I got to actually enjoy retirement with my parents because my parents were retiring last year officially as well. Yeah, so one thing is that, there's this article on from Wait But Why, and it's called The Tail End. So essentially, they say that, at some point of time in your life, you are intersecting at certain tail ends. So your parents might be, in their last 20 or 30 years of their lives, and you are probably having another 50 more ahead of you. But how many more lunches do you have? And when I thought about that, this was an article that a friend shared with me in 2019. But I think it really hit me in 2023 because at that point, I was just traveling so much with work. I think there was one month where I did like 10 flights. And later on, I was like, I'm not even getting that chance to spend time with my parents or like my loved ones. Um, and so in between, the flights where you don't have internet connection, that's what I spend my time thinking about. Yeah, so eventually everyone was quite positive about it. And when I sounded it out to my boss in last year in April or May, he was like, "Yeah, okay, let's throw a retirement party." So it was really lovely to be able to have a little bit of a see ya later party, pun not intended, with everyone in the ecosystem where it all began for me. So I think it's always the people who spark these ideas. They show me that it was possible to do it, and they encouraged me to do it, and eventually they were cheering for it. So I think it's really exciting. My goal now actually is to be able to share about that, creating a platform where essentially all of these resources are like put together as well, because it can be such a voice, and not there are not really like many places online that would tell you like when you should take a sabbatical, and the chance if you're already thinking about one, probably that's the time when you should consider how to do that.
Hmm. You touched on so many great points there. I don't even know where to
I'm
jump
sorry,
in.
I just went on and on and
No, no, no,
on.
it's great. I think for me, the biggest takeaway was that you had the support, which I think is also really important and really helpful. Like, I think maybe a lot of us could be or have faced negative reactions to this idea, and that could either like completely change your mind or limit the scope of how big you think you can take it or where you want to take this gap year. And so I think having that support was critical to you being able to enjoy this time as well. So I think that's really that's really great that you've had that.
Yeah, I'm absolutely like I credit this almost 200% to the entrepreneurial world because most of the people there, they've walked in these shoes before. They understand how scary it can be, as well. And I think, but they were always the ones who were reminding me like, hey, what's your runway like? To actively take that step to take a retirement year or like a sabbatical if that's what you want. It's not just about like, oh yeah, do it, and like try and build a plane and while the plane is flying. So it's a work in progress. And it's also a little bit like the red card theory where I think once you start talking about something, you kind of send a signal out to the world, and people receive or like resonate with that. So one thing that I realized is that sometimes through conversations with peers in the industry as well, they're like, "Have you ever heard of?" And that's when they share about like the memory dividends in the book or by Bill Perkins on Diary Zero. And then there are so many different resources that essentially I ended up compiling all of this. And I think I really appreciate that. Like, because when people tell you like, oh yeah, you should do it, they don't just tell you that you should. They also offer like different inputs of like, here's how you could do it, because these were the things that also inspired me. Yeah, so it doesn't always sound like it doesn't always sound crazy. And I think like mainstream media takes a while to pick up on these trends. And I feel like by the time if you read me, by the time you get onto mainstream media, it's already a little bit too late.
Mm,
Because yeah, I remember like this is something since 2018 that my friends have talked about. But only in recent years, then people start, writing articles on mini retirements. And I was so angry about that. Uh, I'm trying to not be, but yeah,
yeah, I get that.
yeah.
I feel like you mentioned runway and also advice from your peers. So I think that's the perfect segue into maybe some more tangible advice on how you prepared. And so
Absolutely.
so let's talk about like how you prepared financially, emotionally, logistically, what went into making this possible.
All right. I love the crowdsource from you after this as well. With you and Mars, in terms of like figuring out the steps that you guys took as well. And for my side, I think there was a series of things. So I always had friends who were keeping me accountable to this because casually I said it. I passed this idea out before. I'm like, I'm gonna take a retirement year. And originally when I created the Notion page on my Kanban board, it was meant for 2023 because this idea came at the start of 2022. Because I was like, okay, maybe 12 to 18 months to build a 12-month runway would make sense. And apart from that, peers and in by 2023, friends were like, hey, it's this year. When is it happening? So I think that peer pressure was actively at back of mind, and I'm so glad that my friends keep me accountable on that. And eventually it was kind of late. I remember I was in India again having a different conversation with another founder, and they were like, I've always wanted to do this, but I was late to it, but I got to doing it. So later on, the conclusion that he circled back to was like, you are late in your plan, but how are you gonna do it, and when are you gonna do it? Because now you need to have a timeline. Yeah, so I think that was helpful because I always had people kind of cheering or like rooting for me in taking this journey. That's the first thing. So always figuring out the runway, like, and that helps me out with understanding like, okay, how comfortable do you want to be? Like, are you risk-taking in the sense where you still want to stay in a hostel where there are like 10 beds and your sleep might be compromised, or would you rather have that space where you have your own apartment and whatnot? Um, Yeah, so I was thinking more towards the latter, because in Singapore, like, there's this policy where essentially if you're single, you're not applicable for BTO or HDB, like a government housing, until you're 35. Then you can ballot for it, and you probably have to wait for it to be built because it's built to order. So you wait for about 3 to 5 years to get your own apartment. And thinking of this in the persona as like an Asian Chinese female, I think like you don't really get the chance to live by yourself. Yeah. So for me, apart from that, I think this retirement year was also a way to explore beyond Singapore. Like if I were to live in another country, what would that look like? And what are the different ways of lives that could be as well. Yeah, so I was very comfortable like exploring all the different Airbnbs. I wanted to stay. Originally with retirement year, the thesis would have been uh, being in four cities and 3 months each time, because my mother's idea of a vacation is actually going to four places and 3 months each time. Um, a different way to say a retirement year. Um, yeah, but in the end, I ended up staying in at least 60 different homes. Yeah, and yeah, so the timeline kind of got accelerated. This in the end became a little bit more of like a buffet to the rest of the world, and having a little bit of an appetizer. So it's like the prelude to the original thesis of a retirement year. Yeah, so that's one of the things in terms of like figuring out the runway and trying to understand personal risk appetites, whether you're risk taking, you're risk averse, you want to jump into staying in a hostel, or if you want to have your own room. And the second thing was essentially all the resources to keep myself sane, in the sense where there will be some days when you wake up without an identity and you'll question yourself more critically than everyone else, about why you are doing this. And I think you need to have a very clear idea of your why. And because, yeah, there are some days where later on you realize that, oh, you know what, in more than 360 days of supposed to be super great days, you realize that, okay, most days are great, not every day would be. There are some okay days, and okay days in the past would have been like, a good day for yourself, maybe in the year before. So that's the other thing on the resources that kind of keep me grounded, remembering the theories by great leaders and visionaries. So like Jeff Bezos had this regret optimization theory as well. And essentially it's thinking about looking forward to when you're 80. And if you look back into the past, is there anything that you would regret on in this moment? Yeah. So I didn't realize that I like everything that I was doing had actually a theory to it. But later on when I was talking to my friends about it, they always sounded that, have you heard of and have you, read this? And I was like, no, not really. But they were like, you just described that. And it's not crazy. It's workable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you were
Yeah.
you had all this content that you were consuming, whether it was conscious or subconscious, that you were working with. Very interesting.
Yeah. Yes,
The
I've compiled all of this. So a post thing, I'll send you the link and you can share it with everyone. It's essentially a retirement year resource bank.
Amazing. Amazing. And then I want to just touch on, I think that question I just asked, the way you answered it, I think some people they would hope for more like a more hands-on approach or more like definitive numbers. I think a lot of people would be like, how much runway did you have? And we've talked about this previously,
Yeah,
but your point, it's going to vary from person to person, right? That's why you
absolutely.
get that number. I think it does. I think the fact that Xia has like prepared for you a whole like list of documents and resources for you to plan this out yourself, you'll have a better understanding of how much you need after you understand like what goes into taking this year. Because you're right, everyone does it differently. I've been doing my time in doing my time. I sound like I went to jail. I've been enjoying my retirement year. I've been enjoying my retirement year mostly in Asia and Southeast Asia, and that's helped a lot financially. But like, let's say I wanted to spend my time in Europe, for example, I would have had to have a completely different budget. So it really depends on a bunch of different factors, which is why I just want to like point out for people why we can't give a very specific number here.
Yeah. Actually, well, so maybe one thing learning from the entrepreneurs, and essentially a lot of people from US, right? When they were doing their version of a remote year, if they were remotely working, I think what they did, because there's also like a really huge rent crisis back then, was that they gave up their apartments in the US, and based on that budget, so maybe like I don't know, 4,000 US dollars a month. If it was cheaper to live anywhere else, that's where the digital nomads would go, and I think that was a good perspective. I did not really use this, but I use this pretty much as a guideline for me, where I was like, okay, if, for example, a one bedroom apartment in Singapore would cost me $4,000, it's better on any day to rent abroad than to rent in Singapore. Because I would be investing in experiences. I'd be investing in exploring different houses. If you're in an Airbnb, you could figure out a little bit of like experience design as well, to see, is this apartment to your taste or not? Or is it just, a really dull apartment that really does not have personality? It's just there for finance as a functionality. So I think that was some of the things that I had in mind, where originally when I figure out maybe for the 12 months, if anything is less than 4,000 Singapore dollars, because that's the price that you would have to pay for a one bedroom apartment in Singapore, then I would go for it. But then later on, I did realize while traveling in Europe, there are different parts of Europe. So if you're in Western Europe, it's a little bit more costly. If you're in Eastern Europe and the Balkans, and in off season, you get quite favorable rates. The trade-offs are that you don't get to, if you're close to like a seaside coast, for example, and if it's in fall, then you won't really get so much swim time anymore. So the perks that maybe like the Westerners enjoy, or like people beachgoers who enjoy nature, would usually do in summer. You don't really get any of that perks anymore, or you get a little bit of that perk. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of research involved.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you ultimately decide what to do with the time off? Like you said, you modeled this year after your mom's idea of like 4 cities, 3 months at a time, but like how did you decide?
Uh, Originally, I thought that okay, maybe I'll go and try like living in 4 different cities. And in month one, if I didn't like it, I would move on. However, life kind of shook me with different things in the sense where I had a friend who was getting married in Paris Disneyland in May, and then a wedding in Mexico in mid-June, and I was like, and a wedding in Singapore in November. So a little bit of disruption over here, and I was like, every time now, like for example, if I took the flight from Europe to Mexico, and if I fly back to Europe just to stay because I got an apartment, I think that would have been a waste of experience. So in the end, instead of moving, like looking back, I always tell myself that in life you always have to look forward. So when I arrived in Mexico, I ended up going to Costa Rica, and Guatemala, and yeah, and that's kind of like how the plan for the 4 cities and just 3 months of time fell apart, because I realized that actually I would have liked that in an idea phase, but when I execute and I validate this concept, I think my mind is always optimizing based on trying to make the most like carpe diem of each day. And for me, it's always like investing in the new experiences. If you don't like it, you move on. And if you really do enjoy a place, at the end of the day, I realized later on that I would go back to it. So one of my favorite cities that I lived in before was like Nice. And yeah, and I just somehow always find myself going back to it, because in my mind, I used to think as well that if you've been to a city, you probably don't want to go back to it again because you've already seen it before. Later, I realized like this is kind of wrong. This not right concept. Yeah. Yeah, so that's some of those things. And in the end, I think like the map was also plotted based on the friends that I had around, because one thing that I had so much more of now is that I had so much more free time, being able to travel, having the resources to, which is a huge privilege. And later on, but the friends that I have all around the world, from couch surfing days, from pen paling days, they're all like, we have a job, we are based here. However, we can always spare you either a couch or be a room. And I think like this is something where it really helped me out because they were so like, we don't always have a lot of time, but in our free time we are willing to spare that for you. And you can kind of visit us anytime. So our doors are always open. So I think that's a beautiful thing about travel, and being able to have a network of friends all around the world. And a lot of people always think that I'm very rich. I would like to think that I'm rich in friendships as well. So yeah, that's one of those things where yeah, and that's how yeah it influences my decision essentially on where I should be in.
Amazing. Yeah, I think I've also had that. I've been accused of being rich. And I'm like, that is not the fact. That is, in fact, untrue. However, I think I'm similar to you. My network is very rich. I'm very rich in my network, and I think a lot of that is due to being willing to put in the time to foster those networks and to always build on them. And then as you travel, the people you meet along the way, you just never know. I think the world is very small. Like you just never know when you're going to run into them again, or you want to connect with them in the future. And so I think couch surfing is a huge part of that as well for me. All of the couch surfers that I've met through me being a couch surfer on their beds and their sofas, they're all part of my travel network now too, and I always have a friend in those places to visit, which is really exciting. And so I think yeah, building out your network as you travel is a huge benefit for you when you want to take this time off. People are so generous.
Yeah, absolutely. But one of the things to kind of relook at as well for me with the retirement year was that, when you finally have so much time in your life one day, when you don't have an identity as well, what will you show up for? So for me, like I was trying to figure that out. And my thesis was always that I was never really present for my friends or my family. I know that on any day I would always choose work because work is always exciting. That you never know who's going to walk through the doors and who you're gonna have a chat with if they're gonna be like the Italian version of Elon Musk or something like that. So I feel a little bit guilty on that side. But the moment I had the free time, I think for me it was just more of like not just saying that hey I'm there for you, but also telling people that I'm gonna show up. Just tell me the date, place. I'm one call away. And if I can make that flight, I'll be late, but I'll be there. Um, so that was one of those things. And I think really across the years, friendship really does take time to invest in and effort as well. It requires showing up. And so for me, I think this time, like reconnecting with so many friends around the world post COVID, it was really lovely to see how they've grown and evolved as well. So even though we're on quite separate journeys, I think that similarity is always people who are curious minded, who are who are always constantly seeking growth in different ways, and having different perspectives to life. And yeah,
Absolutely. Like fostering and deepening those already established relationships during this time is really powerful as well. Yeah. I
yeah.
think
I like to imagine that. Sorry, I like to imagine that in retirement, I would have that time, that resource, in an infinite resource, to be able to meet friends all around the world. Say like projecting a future self where I'm filthy rich. And I close my eyes and I say, hey, tomorrow I want to wake up in Tahiti. I could buy that flight ticket. So that's me trying to channel that in the retirement year, and hence why it's called a retirement year rather than a sabbatical.
mm,
Yeah, trying to figure out like when I'm 60, what would my parameters look like? And but the difference is that at 30 we have peak health, which is something that at 60 we do not have anymore. Yeah.
I'm also manifesting for you. I hope you're filthy rich when you're in your 60s too, and you can take a flight to Tahiti. But okay, let's say that's not the case, because I think when finances are in play, obviously we all know money is important. Money is a necessity of life. And so when we think about finances, when you have financial problems or you are low on finances, it takes up a lot of mental real estate. And so, did you find yourself thinking about money a lot in terms of balancing that with enjoying your long-term travels?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the meme or like the scene in Harry Potter where Harry has a lot of cash the first time that he's on the train to
Oh,
Hogwarts.
I'm not a Harry Potter fan, but continue.
All right. Okay. Anyway, um, yeah. So when Harry was like, "We'll take a lot of it," like in my mind, that's always a recurring scene when in the first 3 to 6 months of my retirement, because I'm like, I want to be like Harry. Like he had so much wealth, and every time like if his friends wanted candy, he could just afford that. And so for me, like that was a destination of being filthy rich. And later on, between month 9 to 12, I think it started kicking in a little bit more seriously, where I was like, first of all, you are running out of time, which is also back to the root problem of when I was gonna take a gap year, a retirement year as well. Why I felt like I needed more time in my life, because I feel like I was always late for everything and I'm running out of time. And so in month from month 9 to 12, it was a lot more of like, how can I uh, restructure my resources to extend this runway if I am going to extend this runway. And also because last year, when during the retirement year, my parents came to Europe to travel with me. And this year, they enjoyed it so much last year that they wanted a part two. Which was a little bit unanticipated to have it come so soon. So in the end, I was taking them around in Europe in April, which was kind of delightful. But then that was something that I didn't quite factor in terms of like time, because I thought by April maybe I would be preparing myself to go back into, the unretirement phase. The unretirement, yeah. So the retiring of the retirement year. Yeah, but life happened because by the time April came, I spent a really good 45 days with my parents, eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner with them, trying out different Airbnbs. So in the end, I took them on the journey of, moving across cities, trying different things, going to the local markets, and the joys of having, your own kitchen when you're in a different country instead of just a sterile hotel room. Um, and yeah, and then May came and I was kind of figuring out where to go next, because I said bye to them, and then I was trying to figure out if I should be in Europe or heading back towards Asia, because as a foreigner who's traveling around, I don't think it's very easy to look for a job in Europe. They have a lot of policies, and even if you want a digital nomad visa, that would it requires you to earn at least twice as much as a local would. Yeah, and you need a proof bank balance. And when I think about how at least 20 to 40% would go to taxes, I don't really think that's very justifiable. Because I'm thinking like for every dollar I earn, like 50 cents goes to a government that does not even serve me. Yeah, so that's more on a macro scale. So I decided, okay, I'll stay in Europe for a little bit more, explore one more region, which is the Baltics. So I was in Latvia a little bit, which was very peaceful as compared to bustling Rome, where it wasn't even tourist season yet, and there were so many people. There was a lot of noise, a lot of chaos. It's not very clean. And then when I found myself in the Baltics, I think it was really peaceful and very walkable as well. So it reminded me a little bit of Singapore, where at the end of the day, the city is clean. It's and people are spatially aware. They don't bump into you because they keep a huge distance. And it's colder as well as a country, but at least you have kid stays to think about life next, and everything else. Or like maybe just have time to listen to the birds chirping in the park, which is quite a lovely thing that you never really get to do on a normal day to day if you're caught in the daily grind.
You
Yeah.
gotta stop to smell the roses.
Yes, and look for the daisies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We have a few more questions, but while we have Mars here, because we're all like, we've lived this life, we've experienced this, I just want to leave the door open for, do you have any questions that you want to ask? If not, I will continue with my questions. But if you're curious to pick tab-
Not really. I just feel like there's a lot of tangents. I love the theses of her retirement year. You know what I realized is in agriculture, there's a concept that's the same as a gap year. It's called a fallow year,
Yeah.
FALLOW. It's like every 5 years you plant, like you work the soil and then you let it breathe for a year. And then they do the same in the Glasgow Music Festival. They take a fallow year, like every 5 years, they don't do any music festivals. It's like a time to kind of like just like let it breathe. And I think that's kind of like the concept of a retirement. I really like the thesis of your retirement year. So
Thank you, Mars, for raising this, because I am absolutely inspired by the trees and the plants as well. Because I always thought that, if you're maybe borderline hyper independent female, there's always this whole idea that you're a self-sustaining plant. And for me, in my brain, it's always like, in order for the plant to thrive, you always have to, like, what do farmers do, right? Farmers lay the ground to rest. And I was so curious, like, why don't people really talk about this? Where in the work life, apart from climbing the social ladder and the corporate ladders and whatnot. But reality exists that people actually do it. It's just not so
Yeah.
talked about.
And there's a season for everything, just like with plants, So
Yeah. In Singapore, you do not get that because every day is evergreen.
it's
There are only two
tropical.
seasons.
And we have a different
It's tropical. Yeah, there's only rain or no rain. And I think, like, by environmental design, I think Singapore is always driven to be efficient because of that. Like, there are no natural disasters. There are no inefficiencies in your public transport. There's no Manila traffic, which is like 3 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in Singapore, everything works like a machine. So actually, taking this a little bit more, taking it into context with like the work life as well. I think one thing I realized when I was working with my team in the region as well, I could never really understand like natural disasters until, like, having been in the country, and then you realize that, there is really no internet in a typhoon, or like there are no grabs around. There's no way that you can get work done. And that's by force, like because of a physical cost, but in Singapore, you don't really get that. You always get everything is fully like digitized and optimized.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I also wanted to make a comment, Justin, because earlier you were asking Ming about like, or I guess your takeaway was that she had support. But my takeaway was that she made it easy for support to surface. Like she hustled a lot, she saved up a lot. And I think for everyone in this room, I think that's the story. I think, Justin, you were, working very, very young, right? Like you were on TV or something like that when you were younger. And then
I wasn't, but I've been working since I was 12.
Yeah. So
we've been hustling.
Like that. And then I also I literally created saved up to be able to afford a gap year for like 2 years. And I said, like, okay, this is my money, basically. And every time I totally relate with what you were saying, Ming, about like time is your currency, because when I wanted to extend my runway, so I started taking in contractual jobs, and I was like, okay, how many months could this salary afford me? That's kind of like how I started to think. But yeah, I think the story is the same. Like we make it like that the act of preparing for it make it easy for the people around us to lend their support to us, because we've already figured out the hardest part of the puzzle, right, which is the financial aspect.
Yeah, and then making it happen, because a lot of people always just sit on the idea that the devil is always in the details of like when you're finally gonna do it. And right. So a similar review, I saved up for a little bit more than 2 years, because originally the timeline was gonna be like 12 to 18 months. And I don't know, one day I wake up and I realize that, oh my God, it's already 2024. I'm about to turn 29 in a country in India by myself, and I've not really had that part figured out. But I've also RSVP'd to all the weddings that my friends had. So I was like, these are the things that help me out with creating the structure, because I always told myself, if I feel guilty for making time for myself, I can show up for my friends, then let me lean in on that. So I'm very grateful for having that support system. And the last thing is, just having to show up and follow through with the things that you say that you'll do.
Yeah, because people can sense if you're not decided yet, or you don't have things figured out yet. Your family, your friends, they'll be your voice of reason to kind of like navigate that, and they will always advise you from a perspective of someone who hasn't done it. So you know how they
Fear. I would say they advise you from fear.
from fear rather
Yes.
than curiosity, right? And there's a saying, don't take advice from anyone who you wouldn't want to switch situations with, so it's like, if they can sense if you don't have it figured out. So if you show up to them, to your parents, to your friends, and hey, like, I'm thinking of doing this is kind of like my plan A, here's my plan B, it's so easy to show support, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, when I presented this to my parents, I think it was just more of telling them like, parents, this is happening, this is the timeline, and also peers around, because I like learning from the entrepreneurial community as well. So much of it is always having that idea, right, and the implementation and the execution. So when I was thinking about this pitch, what that would look like was also when you fundraise for the time with this money, like I always thought about like, instead of that high table of like, okay, 40% of the money goes into scaling the business. For me, it's like 40% of that money gets reinvested in me investing in experiences.
I love it.
And then, yeah, so I was just, everything that I could only think about was in the business context. And I was like, you know what? Stop thinking about it as that business. You are the business right now.
Oh my
Um,
god, yeah.
yeah, so because there are so many books around that, like the LinkedIn founder doing like the startup of you as well. And I was just like, these are everything that I can think of for work, but I couldn't really like think about it. I always have this idea for myself, but how do I make that happen?
I love those quotes, Ming. Maybe I'll write a LinkedIn article about you and like those.
I will
those
send you all the resources. It's all there.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Is it on the chat?
Not yet. Not yet.
I'll share it after.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yay.
So yeah, I think that's mostly it. And yeah, I'm curious because I mean it's I think Asian Wonder Woman as a community has so many dynamic people as well. A lot of people who are in discovery phase always and resource building mode. I'm sorry, I'm throwing like so much like terms out, but
Mhm.
I think that's the most like with most of the empowered women out there, like these are things that they're looking at. They're curious to explore. They're, sometimes they also like hustling, but not always getting the chance to learn how to take a step back.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, but
absolutely.
yeah, and also with this community, I think I've met so many wonderful people who are in different journeys of their lives as well.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I have one question for you, Ming, because earlier I heard you differentiate a sabbatical. You said like a
Mhm.
sabbatical is different. You call it a retirement year, not a sabbatical, rather. I think that's what you said. What's the
Yeah.
difference for you?
Yeah, so when people say sabbatical, I'm like, I always associate that with, if I'm people profiling, then I would say that a person who is on a sabbatical is maybe somebody who has worked for like, 30 years and they can still go back to like, sorry, like 5 years and they can still go back to a job, because
Yeah.
in the US, like that's the norm.
Mhm.
Or like some countries in Europe, they force you to take 1 year off and then you
Mhm.
can go and explore and you can come back to a job. And where or the other one is like, if you're in a hostel and you meet some of the young travelers who are on a sabbatical before they start their jobs or something like that. But I think that connotes a little bit more on being in budget,
Mhm.
and also having budget in both like money and time. So it's like they know that, okay, this is a simulation of 12 months, but I am a little bit of a broke backpacker in that sense.
Mhm.
So everything that you do would be a lot more mindful towards like how you spend.
Yeah.
Whereas like ideally with retirement year, some of it, I think for me, it's reimagining like what the parameters would look like.
Mhm.
So that I would have the inspiration to live for the next 30 years to make that the
Mhm.
everyday. Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's like kind of like, if at 60 I would be really, really rich, or if at 60 I would be, still curious to talk about to talk to strangers. Like, if I'm casually at a bar and I hear Mars talking to Justin, I'm like, hey, I really love the conversation that you guys are having. I'd love to buy you guys these drinks. To be able to afford that, I think that's a huge privilege.
Yeah.
So I was trying to always, so every time I budgeted like my daily expenses, well, I was always like, if you meet a stranger, like what's the, how much can you afford? Like, can you afford to buy them a lunch, or can you afford to buy them a coffee today?
Mm-hmm.
So I always try and refactor that.
I
But
love that.
subconsciously, yeah, it also became a little bit of an economic thesis, because while traveling with work in the past and being in like different countries, so like Indonesia, in Malaysia, and Philippines, as well as in India. I think it helped with reframing perspectives that, you know what, the entire world is inflating. Inflation is happening in every country. It's just at really different paces because, yeah, at the end of the day, the cost of living is really different from different places. And that is also in tandem to the, how do you call that? The purchasing power disparity that people have. So the wider that poverty range, like the rich and the poor divide is, then the slower that inflation happens because society needs to move together as a whole. But in Singapore, I think it moves pretty fast because at the end of the day, most people are in like middle class. Like there's middle lower and middle upper and middle. But as long as you fall within the range of middle, they can just collectively like raise the prices at a faster pace. So one thing that I realized is like, in France, my cup of coffee would cost me €2. In Italy, and a cup of espresso would be €1. And in Singapore, that would cost, €3 to €4. And so on any day, like it makes sense to be in Italy or France.
Yeah.
Because that means that I can afford 3 more cups of coffee rather than being in Singapore where I could only afford one. And therefore the satisfaction is tried.
That's quite a framework to think about. Where should I live? Do I like coffee a lot?
Coffee is the key driver. I think this was me in my 20s would always be like, if I work in a cafe and I could get 3 cups of coffee for free every day, I have hacked the system because I would be saving $10 to $12 back then. And that's part of the job. Yeah. And in order for me to perform, I was caffeinated all the time. Yeah. But even in present day, I think that's panned out to be a little bit of a toxic trait because now I am over caffeinated all the time. I just made my morning coffee before this started. But I am trying to figure out like realistically speaking, the economics of things that you're consuming. If you're paying for rent in Singapore, that's like $4,000. But if you're in a different country and it's like 1,000, that means that you extend your runway by 3 times. Yeah. So that's like girl math in the back end. That helps out because that helps.
I don't think it's girl math. I think it's real math. I think it's real math.
That's digital nomad math. That's for sure.
Digital nomad math.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And one more segue to the retirement year as well is that like what if you're 60 and you are single? Like realistically speaking, right? If you extrapolate the rate of hyper independence, there's a possibility of that. And I like to tell myself that, the narrative at 60, and if you're single and, for whatever reason that is, you are able to be your own boyfriend where you can buy yourself everything that a guy should have bought you or like, a partner should have. And you are able to afford all of this instead of having to wait for somebody to get all of this for you. Because at the end of the day, like that's the expectation that we have for guys, but we should also always have that for ourselves.
Buy ourselves flowers.
Yeah. So for me, like the definition of buying myself flowers abroad would always be like, if on a day you're feeling upset, how do you nurse your upsetness and how do you cure that? And I know my answer would always be buying myself a cake and a coffee.
I love how you have a budget for that, right? Like,
contingency plans. Contingency plans.
You have the budget for the days that you're upset. That's girl math.
Always.
That is.
Yeah.
That is taking
if
all
there's an
situations
experience
into account.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I think, okay, let's wrap things up because we are almost at time. So let us finish off with one final piece of advice, let's say. I just want to ask you if someone was considering taking a retirement year now, but they're feeling unsure, it's going to be hard for you to boil it down to one sentence, but just like one piece of advice you would share with them.
Well, every time someone tells me one piece of advice, I always have at least three.
Okay, 3 pieces of advice.
All right. Okay. So one thing with working with myself, like I think one thing that I always ask myself is like, am I going to regret this if I don't do it today? Because I think a lot of the times people always talk about the fear of, what if you don't get, certain career goals or certain milestones. But for me, I think one of the biggest fears while traveling, I did realize, I think, is the fear of unrealized opportunities and unrealized potential within ourselves. Because there's always, I feel like if you stay in one environment for too long, you always end up getting caught in groupthink. And it might not always be, it might turn out to be an echo chamber where at the end of the day, like maybe there was a better, more optimized version of yourself that you could have been. So coming back to the conclusion, I think the advice is always asking, like, is what I'm doing today going to cause me regret in the future? And the second thing that if I'm facing a dilemma on taking action, I think I always think about the past, present, and future self, because we are, yes, a human being, but then I think we are multidimensional. Every time when we are doing something in present day, it will create an impact for our future, but it will also cause, there are some days when you wake up and you're feeling a little bit under the weather, and we don't really understand why, but sometimes it could be because our inner child is not fulfilled. And that for me, like in the free time, the extra free time that I had, sometimes I look back and I realize like, oh, I'm actually like feeling sad or mellow when I'm sitting alone, because I realize, I'm looking back at a memory when I was 14 or 15 and I didn't get to do that. So creating that buffer for time is absolutely crucial as well. And I think, yeah, so always thinking in the aspects of like past, present, and future self, because even if we're on this journey, it's not as lonely as we think it to be. Yeah, so sometimes when people ask me if I'm traveling alone as well, I'm like, I'm not exactly. I'm with me, myself, and I. It sounds a little bit crazy, but I'm like, you are today speaking with the 20-year-old self, who thinks about, what if she didn't do this? Or like if she did this a little bit earlier, the timing would not have been right. You would have the resources, but it would still be a strain. So everything falls in place. Yeah. So that's one of those things. And the second thing as well, wrapping everything up, I think one of it that I always have on a daily perspective is always, I have, what if today is the last day, right? Because knock on the wood, like you never really know when life decides that, it's your time. And did you go, like, would you have left this in this moment? Are you content? We're not even talking about happiness. We're talking about contentment. Because contentment connotes more on like doing things based on your pace. And at the end of the day, like we can't always have everything in life, but we can do our best. Yeah. So in this moment, are you content is always the question. Yeah.
Which is a big question. I think that's a great question. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for sitting down with us today. Both of you turned into a bit of a panel discussion, I feel like, in the end, it turned out great.
I love this. At least it's it's the more the merrier. And I always believe that with community building, right? Crowdsourcing is always the way to go. Asking if feeling at any point of time in life, if I ever feel stuck, I always figure out that, just put this question out. The worst case scenario is that people think that you're crazy or like, it's nonsensical. But the best case scenario is that people will be like, wait a moment, I've been there before, or like, I'm glad that you're not the only one. And that creates more human connections.
Yeah.
And which is so important, especially in a day where like in a time when AI is like booming. I don't think AI can replicate that unless we are living in time of like Her, the movie. Yeah.
But yeah, those moments of clicking and connection. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So thank you to everyone for being here. This will go up on the YouTube and the resources will be shared. But that wraps things up for August Fireside. Thank you, Ming Xia, for sitting with us. Thank you, Morris, for joining us. And then we'll see you all next time.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Mars. Yeah, I look forward to having more people share their stories about their retirements. Actually, maybe we should even do like a collaborative article for this on Asian Wonder Woman.
I think so. I'm definitely gonna. I want. So earlier, Ming, you said you wanted to put together resources, and that's kind of like what I wanted to start as well. I was like, why won't I just get started with just creating a quick article on this session? So I might just do that. I might message you, Ming, if I have more questions for you.
Absolutely.
But you said you have resources. Where can we find that?
Okay, give me 1 second. I'm gonna quickly drop the link here.
I will link them at the bottom of the YouTube video as well.
Okay, perfect.
so-
Yeah, that might work.
yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.